Being sent to the doghouse is considered a pretty measly, flea-ridden experience. But more and more people around the world are choosing to live in homes not much bigger than a garden shed. We're going to take your texts as well. We'd love to know how big your house is. Give me a text if you think you live in a small house. 0467 922 666. We might be able to rustle up a prize for you for the smallest house. Producer Melanie Sim is now going to take us on a tour of her small house in Bungendore.
For the past couple of years, I've been living in very small spaces, but this one is probably my smallest. Let me take you for a tour. So I've stepped inside, taken one step, and I've come right up to my dining table. Now, it only fits about 2 people around it at the moment, but I like to have lots of dinner parties, so this is what I have to do. A few quick moves, and you've got an extendable table, which can now fit 8 people around it. Okay, I'll take 3 steps away from here, squeeze past the dining table, which has now taken up all of the lounge room area, to my couch. Now, I also have family that like to come and stay with me from time to time, but the house is so small that I can't really put in a guest room, a guest bed. So instead, I have the couch, which also doubles as a sofa bed. So, and underneath, I've got lots of storage for all the bedding. And there we go, a double bed for when my family comes to stay. So we're going to leave the lounge room / guest room, take 3 steps, and here we are in the kitchen. Now, the kitchen doesn't quite have enough space for a stove top as well. So what I've done is under the bench, I've put the stove, which basically is just a milk crate and a camping stove on the top. And I can cook anything I want on a gas hot plate. A lot of other places I've lived have only had electric hot plates, so I much prefer this. So from the kitchen, just a couple of steps, let's go into the bedroom. The biggest problem with living in a tiny house is your lack of storage space. So what I've done is I've pretty much stored everything in the bedroom under the bed. But I don't have a conventional sort of bed frame. Instead, I sleep on top of 2 cupboards. Now, the cupboards are separated a little bit to give me lots of space underneath. So I've got my vacuum cleaner. Another advantage of a small house, it takes about half an hour to do the housework. The yoga mat, the sewing machine, and all of the camping gear between the 2 cupboards. Then the cupboards are out-facing on either side with lots of compartments with my clothes, storage boxes, and toy boxes for all the kids that come round to play at our place. You've got to give them something to do when you live in such a tiny area. More sewing gear, books, pretty much everything I own at the moment I'm sleeping on top of. Now, the bathroom in this place is really big compared to all the other bathrooms I've ever had. And so if I was redesigning the space, I'd have the bathroom much smaller and then have the kitchen a bit bigger. But now we're going to meet somebody who's been making some incredible designs for tiny houses.
Now, Mel's house is about 27 square metres. That was a great little story. My next guest lives in a much smaller place. Greg Johnson is the founder and president of the Small House Society in America, and he stayed up very late tonight, or his last night, and that was a bit confusing, wasn't it? He stayed up very late and joins me now from his huge house in Iowa. Good evening, Greg.
Yes, good evening. Is this Leash?
Yes, it is. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. I love that visual but audio tour of Melanie's home, and you could really get a sense of kind of walking in through there in the dining room, the kitchen, the bedroom.
Now,
very good.
It was great. Now, you live in a much smaller home, apparently. How small is it?
Well, the home that people know me for is, I call it the mobile hermitage. The size is about 2.13 meters by 3.05 meters, so about 2 by 3.
About 2 by 3. I'm just thinking in
tiny, but and keep in mind that has an upstairs as well, so there's a loft, so you can kind of double that figure.
So in square metres, I'm thinking that's about 12 square metres?
Sure.
In my quick brain drain sort of a bit of calculation. And why so small? Why have you done this?
Well, people often ask, they see these homes and they're commonly on trailers, on wheels, and capable of being pulled down the road. And people want to know, how do we come up with these dimensions of 2 meters by 3 meters, or sometimes you'll find one that's maybe 4 or 5 meters in length, but still just about 2 meters wide. And it isn't really necessarily by choice that people wake up one day and say, I want to live in a house that's only 2 meters wide. But we have these housing codes that are fairly outdated here in the United States, where municipalities, the cities, will not let people build a home that's under a certain size. And the only way you can get around that is by putting a house on wheels, in which case the city doesn't care what you do. So that's how we end up with these really tiny homes. I think most people would probably prefer to live in a home that's maybe the size of what Melanie has, or perhaps 3 meters wide by 7 meters long or something, but then it would not be capable of taking it down the road.
And you say your house is on wheels. Can you give us a bit more of a picture of what it's like? It's not just like a caravan, is it? It's definitely not a caravan.
Well, no, and that's what distinguishes these mobile homes, these houses that are part of the small house movement, from a typical RV or camper that you've seen popularized since the 1950s. Families going on vacation in a little aluminum camper that they pull behind the car or their truck. These newer homes that we're seeing now are built with residential-grade materials or even commercial-grade materials, so they're a minimum or zero maintenance homes, and that's what people really like about them. They'll have a metal roof. Mine has the cedar siding, and one thing that I enjoyed in Melanie's description is how you walk into that dining room, and the dining room is either a table for two, or it can expand out and become a table for more people. Then that table can go aside, and then the couch becomes a bed, and so there's this room that serves multiple functions. Well, that's kind of the design of the mobile hermitage, that you walk into the front door, and that room that you're walking into can either be a dining area or a working area or a kitchen. And, of course, you're not working on the computer and eating and cooking at the same time, so why not just have those three different functions be performed one after the other, in the same space? And that's the idea behind these small homes.
And what about the design features? What makes it, and what's really important inside it that make it livable?
Well, definitely the multi-use spaces, as I mentioned, and not having any surface or cabinet or shelf or appliance bigger than need be. In fact, what Melanie mentioned, that camping stove, is very popular. There's some countries actually where people have a full-size kitchen and they're cooking on a camping stove just because it's nice to cook on a flame where you can see the flame there, and people just enjoy cooking on a flame. So those cooking stoves are popular. Well, in a small house, they're also quite small and easy to store away. So that's what the cooking would be done on, is a 2-burner camping stove. And that stows away. The table that folds out to become a dining table can fold up and stow away and be out of the way when not needed. So that's one important thing I would say, is furniture like the folding couch that Melanie mentioned that can have multiple functions, can fold out when you need it, tuck away when you don't. Sort of like Murphy beds used to be designed that way.
And where do you sleep in your house?
Go ahead.
Where do you sleep in your house?
Well, and that's the other point, is for sleeping, what's common is having a sleeping area upstairs, a loft in that peaked area of the roof, because when you're sleeping, unless you're sleeping while you're standing up, you don't need to have, a 7 or 8 foot ceiling in that room. It's enough just to be sleeping in something the equivalent of a tent in size. So you can climb upstairs, lie down in a queen-size bed, large enough for 2 people, and then, but during the day, you don't need that bed taking up space, so you just leave it up in the attic, essentially, is what it's like, and come downstairs.
And how much, Greg, are your energy bills? Because it wouldn't take much to heat or cool that space, I imagine.
Right, and there are 2 factors there. One is it's a small space, and even the body heat generates enough energy and heat in a small space to keep a house relatively warm. And then the heater that you would use would be just the same heater that you might use in a boat, very small gas heater. And in addition to just being a small space, a person is working with, you can imagine the cost is not that high when you're building a small home. The materials cost the same amount, but you just don't need as many of them. So you can choose to purchase higher grade materials, nicer windows, better insulation. And so that's another factor that makes it less expensive to heat. So maybe, $30 US in the middle of winter, where some people could be spending, per month, $30 a month, where some people might be spending $200 a month for their heating bill. So it's a big difference.
And are there many houses like this throughout America? How many people would be living in a small house? A really tiny house, I mean.
Thousands perhaps. The movement's just getting started, and certainly it meets the needs of people who are either at the beginning of life or toward their senior years, where you think about young college students or people who are young professionals that are just starting out. They don't have a lot of stuff. Probably they don't have, they're not starting a family yet. And so they're relatively mobile and don't need a lot of things. And certainly people who are on into their more retirement years, the kids have moved on. The parents probably aren't at home anymore or whatever. So, again, people find themselves almost living in dorm room-like conditions when they realize they don't have a lot of stuff anymore that they need around. So, but I would say, thousands of people living in these homes, and certainly it's more visually obvious. When you see a tiny home going down the road or you see somebody living in one of these little houses, it's recognizable. But what's interesting is to think that people have been living in small efficiency apartments of the same, square meter space for many years. But it's the new movement of having these homes on wheels that makes it, I think, appealing.
And because we were getting quite explosive in our house sizes, weren't we? I think in Australia in 2009 we were got the lovely award of having the biggest houses in the world, on average 250 square metres. I would have thought that sort of size house would be reserved for America, but we are that sort of country. We are downsizing a little bit, but not to 12 square metres. In Australia, are we seeing any of these tiny houses?
Oh, yeah, there's quite a trend there, I think. In fact, what's interesting is we had launched about 10 years ago, we launched this website, the Small House Society. If anyone's interested, they can go to smallhousesociety.com or smallhousesociety.org. Either one takes you to the right page. And suddenly we saw people visiting the website from, over 100 countries on a regular basis every week. And we realized there's a real trend now toward, I think part of what's moving this is people want low maintenance. They want to build with quality materials, and you just can't build those 50 square meter homes if you're going to be building with, cedar wood siding and metal roofs or stone or something like this.
Because how much do they cost to build, Greg?
I would say, the average tiny home is probably about $30,000, $20,000, something like that.
Because they're architecturally designed, aren't they? They're not a rough piece of throw-together, bang-up housing. They look fantastic.
Exactly. A lot more intention goes into building these homes. They are custom designed for the owners typically, and a lot more artistic attention to detail can be put into these homes because they're not being just thrown together, throwing up a lot of, as you say, 30, 40, 50 square meter homes on a hillside with just the cheapest materials possible. Instead, these are very high-quality homes.
And, Greg, have you ever seen many families living in a small home? What would be considered a small home if you were to fit a family of 4 in?
Right. Well, and that's a really good question because people can get really excited about the small house movement, and there are a lot of people, certainly individuals or couples, living in 200 square feet, or I'll say, 12 square meters, 15 square meters, that type of thing. But for a family 4, if you're living in a home the size of Melanie's, let's say, I think that could still be considered a super small home because you have to look at the square footage per person. And in fact, that's the standard that's being used when people are measuring modes of transportation. You're looking at the fuel efficiency and the sustainability of, let's say, using a bus for travel versus a train for travel or a car for travel, and you look at how many people are in that car, how many miles to the gallon does it get, or what the fuel efficiency is, and you look at the cost per person. So if a family of 4 is living in a home that's twice the size of Melanie's, I would still say, well, they're having essentially the same footprint in terms of per person, right? Is that fair?
That's very fair. Now, the time here is just 5 to 12 on 666 ABC Canberra. I'm Lish Farron. We're talking to Greg Johnson, founder of the Small House Society, and he lives in a tiny house, 2 metres by 3 metres, and he's talking to us about these small houses. Now, Greg, I've just got one last question for you. How long have you lived in this small house?
Well, in my small house, and I do want to make a correction, and I'm not sure if you knew this, but I'd lived in it from 2003 until 2009. In 2003, I worked with Jay Schaefer of tumbleweedhouses.com, and he and I built a house, lived in it for those 6 years. I wrote a book, actually, called Put Your Life on a Diet. You can find information about that also, putyourlifeonadiet.com. And so wrote the book about that. We actually had the Oprah Winfrey show called. The home was on
Anything
CNN
about diets, I imagine Oprah likes.
They wanted to have the house on the show, on their set, and it wouldn't fit because their loading dock was not the right size. But she actually downsized after having Jay on her show, and she put a lot of her property on eBay to sell it. And it was really something to think it had that kind of an impact. But so it was, for those 6 years living in the home, and actually I was off the grid, so no electricity, no water, no plumbing. And I just utilized resources that were in the community. The city that I'm in is Iowa City. It's a college town, so there are plenty of laundromats, there are coffee houses, there are places to socialize if need be, and so home for me during those years had been just a place to study and write my book and sleep up in the loft and just really enjoy the solitude and the tranquility of being out in the wilderness that way.